Okay, so now we dealt with in the preceding parts of this class, because they're short videos, but they kind of form a class altogether, with the essentially the top pay at the university. Now, in the process of investigating this, obviously it was a sort of an obvious. The observation I'll make isn't very, doesn't seem like it's very intelligent perhaps to some, but it nonetheless is kind of pertinent. The top pay is obviously just often one person, right? But the importance of that pay is that it does put a ceiling on what will happen below, right? And in the process of looking at what was happening below afterwards a little bit, I started with the present, I focused on that, but then I went down a little bit and looked at what was the situation below that pay. And in essence, right, there's like just circulating in this university a list of 20 names on it that are all executives and that are all paid more than $200,000. But what's not circulating is that there's actually much more people in this university that are paid above that amount, but most of them are in the faculty of medicine, right? And they're either the administrators or the teachers or the professors in that faculty. And so this problem we have within the university sort of ties in with another problem, which is top pay within the medical field. And it is a pertinent question for society because obviously there's a lot of money drain that's going towards that. And there's also a culture of money that I find kind of very scary, thinking that, in the good old days we had doctors that wanted to help people. I'm supposing most doctors still do want to help people, but they're also helping themselves to public funds quite a bit, right? I did not publish across the university, or I did not like plaster the university with one sign, but I did put it actually in the medical building. And in that sign, which I have here under my eyes, I was asking, is too much wealth for medical doctors bad for your health? And it probably is, because we do know that in societies where inequality grows, there's more health problems for people. Mental health, because there's a lot of stress, but also physical health problems that are interconnected with mental health problems or with stress. And there's also more social problems, there's more crime, etc., etc. And so if we really want to resolve those issues deeply in our society, we'll have to have a peek at what those people earn too. I do understand that's a huge problem, and I would like to deal with it, and I probably will at one point. I started to look at it, let's put it that way. But it's just to explain how it ties into to this first part of the investigation. And there's also a structural thing here, is that the faculties of medicine are privileged faculties in universities across the world. It's not an exception here at the MUNI. And they kind of put themselves out of the boundaries of what's happening elsewhere. As an example, just to give a sort of quick take, right? The Dean of Medicine in 2021 earned $413,000, according to the Sunshine List, which is probably more now. And it's quite a bit. It's quite a bit, considering that a lot of presidents of universities in Quebec don't even earn that, right? And it's and then if you look at the top of the rank there, I'm giving you kind of numbers that don't represent the whole thing, but they give you an idea of perhaps the excess. Like the top paid doctor in 2021 earned $697,000. So basically $700,000 for one doctor, right? It goes down pretty quickly after that, but if you add up those numbers, you have, or those, not the numbers, but the amount of people earning top pay, right? Off of the 160 top paid public servants, or people that are financed by public money within this province, 128 are medical doctors or work in the medical field. And so there's a huge problem there that has to be dealt with at one point, right? Now, so that's an example of one of the issues that appeared afterwards. Who else in the university is earning so much? And who else was earning more than 240 was a good question. And there's like 8 people, if I recall properly, that were earning more than what the average person thought the president should earn, right? But then there's also, 25, 24 people that are earning more than 200,000. And there's, I think, 49 across the university, across the board, if you include the people in the Faculty of Medicine. Don't quote me on those numbers, but from the 49, it's clear, and then the 8 is clear. I forget how many earn more than 20 or more than 200,000 within the university, but there's at least 20 on my list, right? There's some that aren't there because they're professors, and so if I recall, it added up to 24. So there was a question that I asked myself afterwards, which was, apart from that one, which was, how much should professors earn, kind of, or what did the people think about it, right? And so when the semester started in September 23, I went around, so this year, I went around and asked 100 students what they thought the average pay for a professor at the university should be. This was not a random sample. It was also a very exploratory survey. Nonetheless, it kind of gave me an idea of what the people had in their minds, right? And the average I got there is 99,000, so let's say 100,000 per year. The median was 94,000. And I noted one interesting thing, which was that African students had a very different perspective on the question compared to others. Africans were more on the 60,000 mark, because probably based on different standards with different countries, they view 60,000 as quite a bit, right? And so I was kind of surprised, and did, go on asking a few other African people after that how much they thought, just to make sure it wasn't like an exception. And I realized that, basically the idea varies per nationality. So that shouldn't be taken as too much of an indicative number. It somewhat is, but it's very exploratory. And so what I'm suggesting is that we cap professors at 150,000, or rather at 5 times the minimum wage. I want to insist here, perhaps if it wasn't clear, that it should be formulated as a multiple of the minimum wage, because that makes it a changing number according to what the minimum standard for work in New Zealand, in Newfoundland is. Sorry, I live at a hostel, so once in a while I confuse, and we're also listening to the final of rugby last evening, so sometimes I confuse these two islands, which do have a lot of things in common, by the way. Like the people have much more of a strong solidarity, and they take care of each other than elsewhere within the world, within the English-speaking world. And so what I was suggesting here is that it would be decent, I think, if professors understood that in a situation where tuition is doubling, where there has to be, where we have to save money essentially, and the top executives do have their share, but I think professors should also look at themselves, and what I ask them to do is voluntarily remit those amounts back to the students, considering the situation. Not for all professors, but for those that are paid above 150,000. There's not that many, but there are an amount of them that are above that. There's probably something like 12% that are paid more than 160,000. And so there's some that are around 150-ish, but there's not that many that are above 160,000. And so I wouldn't consider that like an extreme sacrifice. I also want to note that professors do have one of the most important responsibilities in our society, right? I went around and talked to quite a few professors, and I was surprised at how good people they were. In the sense that, well, not that I was expecting them to be bad people, but where I come from, high-paid people do have a little bit of a different attitude, right? But I find that, like in general in Newfoundland, the people are much more down to earth. But I was happily surprised to see that quite a bit within the ranks of the professors at the MUN. So I surely wouldn't want them to think that I have a bad opinion of them. On the contrary, the reason why I'm, how would you put it in English, exigeant, so a bit stringent in their case, is because I think they have one of the most important functions in our society, because in essence, they're training the future elite, or the future elites in various fields, right? And if the people training the elites are tempted by greed, unfortunately, are more than tempted in some cases. If you look at the business school of business and the school of medicine, they kind of dug into that temptation or delved into it. I don't think that's very good for the future doctors, right? To have people that are think they're entitled to that much money, right? I do understand, obviously, and professors will be the first to know that if they haven't already, that a lot of people are paid more than they are in our society. Well, a number, right, are paid a lot in the private sector. But I figure if we can pull together and have a university where there is a cap on professors and a cap on executives especially, and it could be a bit lower for executives especially, I think that would be a good example for the rest of society, and it would give a first step to tell other people afterwards, maybe we need a cap on health. Maybe 200,000 for specialist doctors, okay. Maybe 133 or something, like 2/3 that is okay for a general practitioner, right? But if the university itself has gone astray, I doubt that we'll have the punch to bring that home, right? And you all know that what the executives earn in bigger companies and what some rich people earn as inherited money is a lot more than that, right? If you're minimally educated on what the wealthiest people in this world earn, you'll know that it's in the millions, right? It's not in the hundreds of thousands. But we need a base where that can lead by example. And that's what I'm asking the professors, is to lead by example. There is perhaps an exception that I consider, right, in this case, which is that for me, the biggest problem is actually what I'd call consumption money, in the sense that I would personally prefer if that 150,000 would be a little bit lower, right? Or maybe even significantly lower, but we'd have to sit around and talk about it. But in the sense that if you're wanting to go towards a world that's green, we have to understand that pretty much anything above 100,000 is luxury money that's not necessary. And to lead on that front, especially professors should be the first to lead by example, right? But I would not necessarily badly view if we converted some of those amounts into independent research money. So let's say we take $150,000 as an example, right? And we do know that a professor can easily get $200,000 in another university. Instead of offering $200,000 to that professor, we could say at our university, we decided to cap it at 5 times the minimum wage. We're going to give you 150, but we'll give you 50 grand free of any ties, which you can use for research in whichever manner you want, and you're not obligated to, sorry to say so in such a perhaps distasteful manner, but to suck up to research councils to get money. You don't have to overly justify it. You do maybe have to give us an account of how you spend the money afterwards, but we're giving you this money free of time, like you're free of in a manner that's for you free to use, right? So I'm not saying we're going to give 50 grand to every professor, but if we manage to scale down a little bit, let's say professors agreed to be paid 100,000, right? And on exchange, then we could give 20, 40,000 to each professor, or like on average, right, depending on experience, to spend in whichever manner they've deemed fit. Because a lot of research that's coming from the councils is, between parameters that might seem good on paper, but a lot of good stuff happens when you dare to do something differently. And I think that if these professors had the freedom to do that, a lot of good ideas could come out from that. Those amounts of money could be accumulated. They could be also pooled with other amounts from other professors. And so out of that, there would be, I'd imagine, some research that's maybe a little bit more worthwhile than following in the stead of what everybody else is doing in other universities. This obviously has to be discussed, and I in an ideal world, I'd like the professors to be able to self-regulate themselves, right? The reason why I'm suggesting 150 is because it seems to be quite enough, and as a starting point, I think that's reasonable, right? It does not affect many professors in this institution, And you have to bear in mind also that the situation is a lot worse than other universities in this country, and it's a lot worse than other universities in other parts of the world, right? So I certainly wouldn't want you to think that, well, in some situations, in some cases, actually the top pay here is like totally out of control. But if you look at professor pay, like there's let's say if you take Ash Hussein, right, which is a finance professor here, he was earning 170 before the 12% raise that they got, right? He's the president of the MUNI Fund, right, the MUNI Faculty Association. And as the president of the MUNI Fund, he, should lead by example and perhaps be one of the first to remit his excess money. So he was earning 170 and he got 12% on top of that, which is roughly, if my count's correct, right? He's a finance professor, so he can correct me, he's 20,000 more. I do know that if that same person went to Toronto and got a position in Toronto, he would earn $500,000. And I do want to thank him for being here and to teach kids here at such a low pay, considering the difference that he could perhaps earn a lot more in the private sector. Also, I know he's well, I interviewed him once and I felt as if he was like a true professor, right? Somebody that loves his students. But honestly, like, we need some leadership, and we're going to need some leadership on that front too. And so I'm inviting you guys basically to debate. You all have PhDs, you all have sufficient education to be able to look at things a little bit differently and to come up with something reasonable. So what I'm suggesting as a first take would be 150,000. I deem that reasonable. And if you want to go ask other citizens what they think, well, I did so a little bit asking the students, and their average was 100,000. So I figure with 150, I'm not too far from a reasonable ceiling. But I do think there has to be some activity on that front too, some action on that front. So I'll keep it at that. But just keep in mind that obviously it's not such an easy issue to deal with, because the issue of top compensation does have ramifications elsewhere, right? So I've stuck to executives and professors because there's two situations where there has to be some moderation. Professors, so they can remain true professors and independent people, and executives, so they can, in this case, quite honestly, stop robbing the bank, right? Because they've done it in broad daylight, but the taxpayers in this province have been robbed by these people, and I am asking them especially also to pay it back, right? Especially Ms. Timmons and Ms. Dr. Cash, to pay back what was given to you guys in excess, because that money is needed to finance at least freer high education within this province, and there's no justification for having robbed the bank in broad daylight in the manner in which you did so. Also, the present president, and the remaining VPs are also all guilty of having taken too much out of public funds. And so I'm asking them to pay back what is due, and also suggesting that some unions and some groups within this society could maybe start a petition and ask them to do so. I'm not sure what the results would be, but at least I think that, a lot of times in politics, when you fire somebody, or somebody gets not fired, but gets kind of pushed aside, like Miss Timmons was sort of pushed aside from this university, the penalty is to lose your job. But what about the money that was taken in this case, And they doubled the tuition on the kids while this was happening. And at one point you need justice, and I think in this case, justice should be a little bit retroactive. It's an exception, because justice tends to be looking towards the future. When we change laws, we change them for the future. But I think that in this case, retroactive justice would be true justice.